The US GDP, to put that into perspective, is about $14 trillion. Here you have this massive debt in the United States of $11 trillion. And of course, the Obama administration, to pull the economy out of the crisis, has run up spending to the point where there is going to be a deficit of over $1 trillion. And trillion-dollar deficits are going to exist for a number of years to come. So the United States is going to have to borrow vast sums of money through its treasury bonds to be able to finance the level of its indebtedness. Now, at present, foreign central banks, principally that of China and that of Japan, underwrite the U.S. national debt to the extent of 25% of that debt. That's gigantic. So you have the Bank of China, the Bank of Japan buying trillions of dollars worth of U.S. Treasury bonds to help sustain the U.S. government's ability to deal with its national debt. Why do they do it? One reason they don't do it is because they think it's a good investment. In fact, the rate of return on U.S. Treasury bonds is so low that it's not a very interesting investment. The Chinese and the Japanese are doing it to keep the American market open for their exports. And that's an important point to make because, of course, as a result of the crisis, American imports of goods from China and from Japan, and also, by the way, significantly from Canada, have dropped very seriously over the past year. And so for the game the Chinese and the Japanese have been playing of buying trillions of dollars worth of U.S. Treasury bonds to keep the American export market open to them is one in which they are over time losing interest or regarding as less beneficial than in the past. And a signal that we got of that was in the winter of 2009 when the governor of the Bank of China said that he believes that in the future the US dollar can no longer be the reserve currency of the world, that it's going to have to be replaced by a basket of currencies, let's say including the yen, the euro, and the American dollar, as well as potentially other currencies, the Chinese currency itself. For instance, that's a very important moment when the Bank of China, such an important institution, makes that kind of statement. Now, Barack Obama and Timothy Geithner both denied that the U.S. dollar was about to lose its reserve currency status. So that is the first layer of debt. The second comes from the net indebtedness of Americans to other people in the world. That's been rising for several decades. You can see that as a consequence of the current account deficit year by year of the United States. Now this year, because of the recession, the current account deficit is going to be smaller. Americans are importing less. But over the last 20, 25 years, they've been running up this string of current account deficits that has meant that Americans have been living beyond their means, consuming beyond their means, and that the United States has been running up a debt of trillions of dollars. In other words, Americans owe several $trillion more to foreigners than foreigners owe to Americans. One consequence of that has been an increasing takeover of important parts of the American economy by Japanese investors, by Chinese investors, by European investors, and even on a fairly large scale by Canadian investors. Now, the third element of this debt that is so fundamental to the crisis is personal debt in the United States. We can call it the credit card debt. Americans now owe, are personally indebted to the tune of 11 or 12 trillion dollars. And because the economy has slowed down, because houses have lost value in the U.S., because Americans are feeling the pressure of their debts, it inclines them against the kind of spending that made the consumer of the United States the kind of hero, if you like, of the whole world in terms of the markets that they created. So that debt is a debt that is extremely important in the U.S. As a consequence of this, and then you think of an American government that at present is fighting 2 foreign wars, which together have had $1 trillion price tag on it. You think of the overspending on healthcare in the United States because of the system of private healthcare, which means that healthcare in the U.S. costs something like 18% of GDP, far above the healthcare costs of any other developed country. It's usually in the range of 10 to 12% of GDP. That's another $1 trillion that is wasted year by year in the United States because of the disorganization of the system. The consequence of all of this is that the United States is going to be going through a transitional period to deal with the weight of these various layers of indebtedness. Because once the system starts going in reverse, and instead of having the kinds of gains that were being made before the crash, you now have the reverses and things like the crash of the housing market, it's going to take years for the U.S. to get itself back on track. And finally, I'm going to conclude this segment with this comment. What we're seeing is the end of a system. We can call it globalization, the American-centered global economy. We can also call it the neoliberal world order, which has existed since about 1980, based on neoconservative economic policies, based on the ideas of governments like the Thatcher government in Britain, the Reagan administration in the United States, the Mulroney government, and more laterally the Harper government in Canada. This neoliberal system has been a system based on the idea that you should take the virtues of free enterprise and expand them to the whole world, so that investments can go anywhere, so that resources can be extracted from anywhere, so that cheap labor can be hired anywhere. It's that system that became overextended, that system which is now in crisis, that system which has gone down with the crash of 2008. In the next segment, in segment 4 of this lecture, I'm going to talk about the implications of this for Canada.